Good evening, good evening, good evening. Kick off in just a little over a minute. Very nice day. A little cool this evening, so I am donning a sweater. Hope all are well. For those who follow me on Facebook, I'm sure you have some familiarity with what my week has been like, particularly the last couple of days, or at least a couple of days ago, having been bitten by a dog while on duty or at work. But we are well, healing is coming along well. So I'm not a complainer by nature anyway, but certainly won't complain. It's 9, you know me. I'm gonna get on in and so I can get on out. You see the basic write up there for this evening. I apologize. New job, still trying to get adjusted for anyone who's gone through that process, which I suspect is most of us. Start a new job, and it's a learning curve, as I keep explaining to people. So, time constraints and major differences in time structure. I work remotely, which means I don't. It's not an 8 to 5 or 8 to 5, 8 to 4, 8:30 to 4:30. It's really per my client. So, and of course, I'm a father and single father and all those wonderful things. Won't get into that tonight. So, just trying to get all that together and figure all that out. Takes a little bit of time, but we'll get it together. We'll get it together. That being said, I want to get into this tonight and get out of your way. Might be slightly different than what you're accustomed to, but I do want to be a bit more, I won't say technical. And so I'm going to use articles to kind of give you a lot of this information so I don't have to say it necessarily. And for those who do like to do a little light reading, stuff is not particularly difficult to work through. So hopefully it won't be too much. Here's one I definitely want to share with you. I think you might find this particularly interesting. I'm actually mentioning some stuff from it, of course, but might find this one particularly interesting. And if you're on YouTube, you won't necessarily be able to see these unless I share them in this manner. These are particular websites, articles, excuse me, that you can look at, and I'll put the other one up in a moment. So anyway, this is Gabe's views. Every so often, I've been doing these broadcasts for over a year now. So every so often, I'll kind of share my disposition. You say, well, Gabe, every week you're sharing your views, but not necessarily personal views. I do share thoughts, considerations, but not necessarily personal views. So this month, I just said, let's share some personal views. Now, this particular article, you can actually see the information right in the article, in the article's ULR. And I want you to note that root, cult, grow. Okay, watch this. The Latin root cult means grow. And again, that's from the article you see that's up there. The Latin root cult, C-U-L-T, cult, means grow. Today, we will cultivate knowledge of English vocabulary, words that have grown from the root cult. Culture is often categorized by the things which a group of people have developed or grown over time, such as laws, art, language, which is why I posted the first article, over time, such as laws, art, language, etc. Different cultures can cultivate themselves by carefully growing in different endeavors, such as music, architecture, ways of making war, or scholarship. Societies or people who are uncultured haven't grown or developed very much at all. And then there are cultures that seemingly grow in a very short period of time, such as cyber culture, or those behaviors and habits that have grown from the use of computers and the internet. For instance, some cultural emphasis might be on agriculture or the growing of food by farmers. Those farmers might focus on horticulture or growing of plants in gardens. Or a farmer could focus on pisciculture culture, I guess is how you say it, the growing of fish for consumption by humans. Then there are aviculturists who grow or raise birds, viticulturists, I guess I should have read this through, who grow grapes, especially for making wine, which would have been like the Jews, right, for example. And arboriculturists who specialize in growing trees. Okay. Festivals often have multicultural activities which feature customs grown. I'm just doing this to get this in your head. Grown from many different cultures, i.e., Mardi Gras, which if you kind of watch it, and I don't know all the history behind it, so don't ask. I wouldn't be the one to ask, I should say. But you find, like, when you go out to music festivals, you see the multicultural, the cultures that were grown and then come to the festival in celebration, right? And if you're new to one of these many cultures, you would have to acculturate yourself, okay? That is, grow towards the customs, habits, and behaviors of the people to whom you are new. You need no longer consider yourself uncultured in English words that grew from cult. And I'm doing this because I know when we say cult, trust me, I know the other side of that. Having now cultivated your knowledge of vocabulary grown from cult. And of course, grown and cult are essentially synonymous. Culture, what a group of people has grown over time. Cultivate, to grow or develop. Uncultured, not having grown, etc. And they go back through the words that they've given. So hopefully you've gotten that, because that will broaden immediately the scope and the depth of what we're going to talk about tonight. So let's go back now, because I want to discuss my views on culture and community and how it impacts who we are, who we come to be. But I knew if I would have just said cult, you would have thought about some religious group, which that term, in terms of Merriam Dictionary and things of that nature, yes, one of the ways that a cult is looked at when you talk about it from a noun perspective is a religious group. But if you take the word cult as grow, that is a religious group that has grown. What about occult or occultic? Okay, so this is a religious group, typically a small religious group that has grown And what I noted in the definition, I want to read that in the definition of occult, OCCULT, or occultic, of course, at an IC. What I noted, in those definitions is it kept referring to this kind of religion that was really just a almost an anti-religion to the established religion, whatever the established religion is. So if you say the Catholic Church, then, non-Orthodox, would be classified as occultic, not holding to the general standards that the Roman Catholic Church held to. See, so it's a religion that grew in really anti-grew, if you will, which is not a word, but grew in opposition. So cult just simply means ultimately grow. Now, if you try to get to that definition, I'm telling you now, it's good. You got to look at old dictionaries to get there. The newer dictionaries tend to bring in the more modern definitions. So that's why I wanted to present to you that cult means grow, and culture is those things that have grown. So I put this article up there because I want you to see what are some of the elements that grow culturally, right? Okay, you got music. And so a culture tends to have music that is reflective of its growth, okay? So music is not typically disconnected. Yes, there are music genres, but those genres, if you track them historically, we're not going to talk about music tonight, but if you track music historically, you will see that music grew, whatever the stylings, grew out of a particular culture, okay? And that you can already see how the word community has its part, but we're not going to get into community, maybe not at all tonight, but I wanted you to see that. Here's another one, art. So music and art, and there's architecture and or artistry. Those types of things are often reflective of culture. They reflect the particular views and stances and attitudes of a culture. Matter of fact, here's another word, belief. Now we can bring in potentially occult, right? So now I said I'd be a little bit more technical, not trying to be, but I want to do this to kind of set this up. So we talked about a couple of weeks ago, nature and nurture. And as you can see in my write-up for this particular week, we're looking at not nature, i.e. biology, one, because I'm not a scientist, don't want to get into all of those types of things, but we're looking at nurture in particular. And when we're talking about nurture, one of the major elements of nurture is community. And within community, or one of the outgrowths, so that you can see the distinction, one of the outgrowths of a particular community is the culture. Let me do that again. So when we're talking about nurture, when we're talking about raising a male or female, yes, I said it, raising a boy or girl, raising a child, that child does not typically just grow aimless of any particular culture. No, that child grows, is cultivated in a community. Let me do it again. That child grows or is cultivated in a community. So think of it this way. Let me simplify it. The community, which is why we don't have to necessarily get into it in terms of this word. The community is let's call it the vehicle. The vehicle. Okay. So the community is the vehicle in which a child, you and I, at some point when we were children, in which we came along. We went towards. We were transported from childhood. Oh, I love it. From childhood to adulthood. Let's do it again. So the community, or even maybe communities, in which you and I, when we were children, were transported from childhood to adulthood is community. Okay, that's the vehicle in which we were transported. And within that vehicle, we became aware of the culture. We became aware of the beliefs, of the music, of the knowledge, of the art, of the lifestyle, of the economy, believe it or not, of the crafts, I told you before, architecture, the fashion. Oh yeah, we're gonna talk about it tonight. The food, yeah. Food, the pastimes, what types of things. So you didn't realize all this was in culture. See? We just say, this is our culture, but we never stop to really break down what we mean by culture. So tonight I want to spend a little time because this is a part of the nurturing. See how that works? Did that work? So when we're talking about nature versus nurture, we did all that a couple of weeks ago. I want to look more precisely at this idea of nurturing, of cultivating. Yeah. So we want to look at this notion of nurturing. And within nurturing, we have to give some respect to the vehicle that carries our child or carries a child from childhood, from infancy to adulthood. And then, of course, because the reason why culture becomes the key word is because one of the things about culture is what's passed down. So community is the vehicle, but culture, if you will, I won't say it's the fuel, but it's the stuff going on inside the vehicle. It's the reason why things are happening in the vehicle. Wearing a seatbelt or not wearing a seatbelt, if you will. So community is the vehicle that carries the infant child to adulthood. Cultivation, see? But what's happening in the vehicle is, in my opinion, just as, if not the most important conversation. So let's talk. Let's get into it. Let's get into it. And we're going to frame this, and I gave you the article. Let me put it back up here real quick. Here's the article I'm going to use. I'm not going to read through this stuff. I'm going to use the major bullet points as a way of framing my conversation. What I want to say to you, good evening to you as well. What I want to say to you is these things that nurtured you, that nurtured me, that's nurturing my son, that you nurtured your sons and daughters by. These are the things that are influencing and impacting who we are. Even if we don't think about it, even if we didn't, if your children are already grown, even if you didn't stop to think about the particular elements that you were cultivating or growing, I'm going to keep doing it till we get it. What was growing our children? What was growing our children? No, you weren't growing your children exclusively. I know, Gabe, I raised my kid by myself. You don't even understand the magnitude of what that phrase means. If you actually think you raised your child by yourself, let me ask you a question to prove that you don't even understand what you're saying. Does your children listen to the exact same music you listen to? Take a moment to answer. I'll have me a drink of agua. Does your children like all the exact same movies you like? Here's another element of culture. Ready? Here's another one. Language. When you listen to your children's slang terms, are their slang terms the same as your slang terms? Or do their slang terms mean the exact same thing as your slang terms? I almost guarantee no. Do your children spend more time on social media than you do? That's cultivation. That's cultivation. See, we don't stop to think. Now, don't give me this stuff about watch too much TV and all of that kind of thing. I'm not talking about that, even though that's an element. I'm not getting into that. All I'm telling you is that that's all a part of the cultivation or the growing up of our children, and therefore the growing up of us. Here's one that you hear all the time. Yeah, when I was a child, we used to go outside and play. When I was a child, we used to go outside and play. What you're referring to, watch this, what you're actually revealing is, unless your parents were outside playing with you every time you went outside to play, unless they were outside with you every time, all the time, there were others in your vehicle, in your community, that was a part of your growth or cultivation. Oh, I'm talking good. I'm talking good. Let me get some water on that one. I get some water on it. So then my point is, cultivation is huge, or cult or culture is huge. Now, for those of us who are grown, and as I work through this, I'm going to start working through this. As I work through it, some of you who are of age, I'm 48 years old, you might start reflecting on where you come from. And I want to suggest to you that's the point. Because you can get some kind of handle on why or what influences or what impacts or like I just said, why you do what you do. This might help put some perspective in there as to the fact that, well, my mom didn't do that. My mom was a single mom, or my dad didn't do that. So where does this come from? You might have even had your parents or grandparents ask you, boy, we didn't teach you that. Man, girl, we didn't teach you that. Where'd you get that from? I'm answering the question already. I've already answered it. I'm telling you that it was a part of the overall community. Just because your parents and your grandparents and your auntie and your uncle who raised you didn't know about it, it didn't mean that it wasn't there. In fact, when it comes to nurturing, that whatever you say, you didn't uniquely create that. It didn't come out of nowhere. It was a part of the community in which you were cultivated. It was a part of the community in which you were grown. And just because the main cultivators, your mom, your dad, your aunt, your uncle, your nana, your Medea, just because they were not the ones who introduced it or used that thing to raise you up, doesn't mean that it wasn't there. Maybe it was a school teacher. Maybe it was a coach. Maybe it was one of your peers that cultivated it, that grew it, for better or worse. Many people who find themselves addicted, for example, don't get mad, to cigarettes, didn't have cigarettes introduced to them necessarily by their parents. Many had cigarettes introduced to them by their peers. Peer pressure. There's also this thing called peer acceptance. Peer acceptance and peer pressure are not the same thing. I won't get into that. So understand, alcoholism and addiction to alcohol, and when I talk to people and they tell me they was drinking and they was sneaking their dad's booze, going into the cabinet and found his keys and unlocked the alcohol cabinet and start drinking, and when they keep talking, you find out that they had friends who were talking to them about drinking, and not in terms of abstinence, in terms of use. Hey, man, come to the house and get a fifth of this and a ninth of this and a whatever. And their first introduction to drinking was peers. So when we're talking about, I know that's scaring the daylights out of some of you, but let's just be real. If you look back to your childhood, a part of the cultivation that has led you to who you are, a part of the nurturing, a part of the upbringing that has led you to be and to think and to believe is, in fact, not just your mama, not just your daddy, not just your siblings, but your peers, or your enemies, or your bullies, or what? I don't know. Exactly, the people in it again. And so let's look at community as the vehicle. Now, we remember back over a year ago, we looked at community is a smaller piece of society, right? Let's do a little bit on community so we can get back into culture. But we talk about the fact that community is a smaller piece of society. Now, you ain't gonna like this, but stay with me. It's really obvious. And I love that, victims of their environment. So when you talk about things like community, let's go back, 60 years or so, and you understand, obviously you can see my skin tone, that those who were of my particular ethnic disposition, we call now African Americans, but go back far enough, who were closer to being Africans than they were Americans, as you understand the legal precedents. So go back about 100 years, 150 years or so. If you go back far enough, they were still Africans who were in America. They weren't African Americans. I know this is uncomfortable, but stay with me a second, because I'm saying something. And those Africans who were here in North America, see, I did that, on this continent, and say it that way, were indeed victims of their environment. Yet, stay with me, what is fascinating is that even though the society at large despised them, let's talk plain for a second, even though they were chattel slaves, even though they were in many cases worth less than the oxen and the horses and the dogs and the cows, even though my ancestors were worth less than white human beings, let's just say it the way it is, they were able to develop in that society. And understand, I'm sitting in Louisiana, and I was told that not far from where I'm literally sitting, there were Africans who swung from trees. So please understand, I'm not biting my tongue for nobody. Literally, I was told when I got here this second time that where I currently live, they used to lynch people not far from where I'm literally sitting. So excuse me if I don't bite my tongue. And I'm saying, if you go back far enough to the time, that'd be before the Louisiana Purchase. You see what I'm saying? If you go back before the Louisiana Purchase and go on back, there was a time when those who looked like me, probably a little bit darker, was living in this society as outcasts and as nothing more than animals, like the one that bit me on my leg, and understand that even though they were in a society that thought them no more than property, somehow, some way, transition, did you see it coming? They developed community. Even though society at large did not look upon them favorably beyond their ability to work 20+ hour days, they developed, now let's do it again. They developed languages, and they developed norms. They developed music. They developed festivals. Mardi Gras. They developed rituals and ceremonies. They developed holidays, days that they praised and they worshiped, and they developed pastimes. They developed particular foods. Do you understand what I'm saying? That even though they were living in a society where eventually there came Jim Crow laws after Louisiana Purchase, that even though they were living in a society that said, okay, now you're no longer a slave, but you're still only 3/5 human. Somehow, some way, they developed community. They created their own vehicle, and in that vehicle, oh man, I love it. They cultivated. They created a culture. Now, the definition of culture basically means, and this is, of course, a working definition. I don't get too technical on these things. Let me give it to you real quick. And this is all in the article. Shared experiences that are transferred, from generation to generation. Shared experiences that are transferred from generation to generation. So this culture of the Africans that were not Americans, let's say it the way it is, the Africans that were not Americans, they were not considered citizens. They were considered, well, animals. If we just talk plain. Somehow, some way, they developed community. They often had to live, obviously, in extraordinarily poor housing, and they lived together. Now, watch what I do here. And because they were living together, that automatically put them in a position of community. They weren't accepted in other places outside of where they either worked or they lived. And in those communities, ladies and gentlemen, they developed music. Anybody ever heard of jazz? Yes. Now, I'm just using this as an example. This ain't History Month, Black History Month, but this gives you an example of the cultivation or the creation of culture over time. Shared experiences. Transfer from generation to generation. Over time, jazz and blues, rhythm and blues are directly the results of the, watch this now, watch what I do, African culture, assimilating to some extent into the American culture. Oh, you don't like it. You don't like it. So you understand, ladies and gentlemen, these were Africans who were brought here, sold and brought here, were forced to live in utter poverty and work for hours and hours and hours. Can you understand how blues? Can you see it? See, that's just one example. So this music styling called blues, well, you know what blues is. We think My Baby Done Left Me. But if you think about it, blues is talking about the blues or the bad times of life. And singing in a way to ease the plight of those who are hearing and singing the music. So, Gabe, what are you telling me? That culture, the very thing that is used to shape who I am and to shape who you are, is also shaped by us. Let me drink some water right there. Do you want to know why hip hop, let's come to a little bit more modern time, in about 40 years now, about 30, 40 years. Why has hip hop gradually changed over time? Because hip hop was born essentially when I was a youngster, but it was born by that group about 10 years older than me, somewhere roughly in that. I'm kind of in that group, but roughly in their 50s now. You know, 50s, close to 60s. And that group birthed hip hop. And hip hop had a political message. And all of those types of things. I won't get into all of that. You know, that's not the point. But I want you to understand that hip hop, as an example of the music, birthed in another one of those specifically African cultural musics that was born in a society that still did not readily accept us. And it took root in the late 70s, 80s, and began to find a voice, because watch this, here's the key to why I'm picking on music. One, because I'm a musician and a singer, but because music has a way of expressing the cultural disposition. Music has a unique way of telling people in a very rhythmic way what the people who are singing it, who are living it, are going through. Hence, rhythm and blues. Hence, hip hop in its original form. No disrespect to the modern day stuff, but hip hop in its original form was a cultural statement to music. Rhythm and blues was a cultural statement to music. Jazz was a cultural statement to music. How about flow tree, which I know is more modern, but that's really just poetry to really jazz and hip hop stylings. So it really ain't that young. It ain't that young. Now, this is not about the African American plight, but I'm using it, one, because I know it clearly, and two, because it is a great example of what I mean by nurturing. So over, the last couple of 100 years, you've seen the Afro-kin who then became American. I won't argue that kind of stuff at this point, who became American and introduced into the American culture, which was, let's just be honest, really was the white culture. See, when you say American culture, what you really mean is white culture. That's what you mean. Now, there ain't nobody confused about this. That's what we mean. The American culture is the white culture. It's the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. WASP, remember that? It's the white culture. However, notice, and we're looking at culture now. Notice in the nurturing of those who come to the American culture, now we're said to be a melting pot. That this society in America is a melting pot, and that we have representation from all the bring your huddled masses. That's what it says on the Statue of Liberty, that we are a place of immigrants. I'm not going to get into the politics, which has its place in culture, but is that altogether true? Quick note, have you been listening to the confirmation hearings for the young African-American woman? I've caught snippets. I've been busy with all this stuff going on, but the little bit that I've heard, is it strange that the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant males, so happen to be GOP in particular, have come at her about things that they consider to be of the black culture? Not going there. I'm just using that as an example of why culture is so important. Because what we have heard from these proceedings is that crime is somehow ultimately black. If you've been listening, they're not very subtle about it. Is that crime is ultimately a black issue. It's in the black culture. And yes, crime is in the black or African American culture, but it's also in the Asian culture. It is in the white culture. It is in the Indian culture. Crime is in all cultures because crime is not cultural. Crime is not cultural. Crime is society. See, crime is societal. Crime is not culture. There is murder in every culture. There is murder in every community, if you will. There is stealing in every community. There is lying in every community. There is infidelity in every community. I'm just talking. I'm just laying this stuff out. Do what you want with it. I'm just giving it to you clear that when it comes to crime is not cultural necessarily. Now, you can do a lot of statistical analysis and say, well, the African Americans are doing this and the whites are doing this and the Indians, but ultimately there is crime that is across the board. So crime is a societal issue. Yes, there are communities, geographic communities where crime is greater. I understand that, but you can't say crime is a black thing or an Indian thing. You can't do it. You can't do it. So when we talk community, we are not talking about things like crime. I want to make sure I make a distinction. When we're not talking about societal, we're talking community. We're talking about those shared experiences out of which culture, out of which things are grown or cultivated. Woo, it's good stuff. So we've talked about music, because music is really obvious, especially from the African American community. But you have art, which again, very particular images and things that reflect the African American disposition. Now, the African American community is diverse. And anybody, of course, who deals with us, and not only us, but deals with us, knows that the African American community is extraordinarily diverse. There are those in the, and I'm not going to get into any grotesque thing, but there are those in the African, and I'm only going to use what I know. There are those in the African American community who see the nude body as something to be worshiped and appreciated, as created by their creator. And their art reflects that. And we have no problem with that. And there are those in the African American community who give themselves to pornographic presentations, who see the body as merely something for pure pleasure and disregard. For disregard. Absolutely. It should be. Put that on a t-shirt. Anyway, so what you understand is, ladies and gentlemen, so art is another really tremendous expression of communities, individual communities. I live in a community, I won't get into that tonight, but I live in a community where I suspect, based on what I've gathered in the 3 years I've been here, this community would probably lean more toward pornographic images. And I'm just guessing here. Don't hold my feet to the fire. I don't actually know the people here, but from what I've gathered in 3 years, they would probably lean more towards a pornographic expression, or for example, of nude paintings, and view them in a very negative, derogatory way. I'll leave that there. There's non-African Americans here in this community. As a matter of fact, on both sides of me, but I'm just telling you, within the confines of this community, in terms of the physical, geographical location, I didn't post this article because I didn't want to offend, but there is a thing called high culture. Let me lay it out a little bit. There's a thing called high culture. And in high culture, it comes down to, which is why I didn't want to get into it, but in high culture, it comes down to those things that basically are considered elitist. So when you talk about music, you're talking about classical music, which has been around for hundreds of years, since the 1500s. Okay? That was high class at its time, and over time has become, again, if you go to, for example, New York, and want to go to a classical rendering of a ballet or classical music, you're probably going to pay $1,000 for a ticket. Just telling you. Classical music is to this high culture what the Academy Awards are to awards. Okay? So there's high culture. Now, what is ironic is jazz, which has been around for a good long time now, has now moved into a high culture type of status, even though, you can go to Carnegie Hall and places like that and listen to, a jazz artist. That's high culture. However, it's still being played in clubs, literally where I live. Costs you $20 to cover the charge to get in. So it still maintains its grassroots culture. Enough about music. So you have art. But also, here's where you start really talking about shaping people's thinking. You also have cultural knowledge. You have, I don't want to call it street knowledge because then that gives the impression of the same kind of ghetto mentality thinking. But essentially, you have knowledge that is germane to a particular community. So if you were in a more street-like community of people, they would call it street knowledge. You see where I'm going with this? So there is knowledge that is germane to a certain community. There is knowledge that is shared in that vehicle, in that community. I hear my son from time to time, he's watching videos and he's laughing and responding, and he's facts. Now that's with some of those words, right? That's one of those words. Fact is a word, that's been around for who knows, but the way it's used in slang nowadays, oh, that's facts, which is to say that's the truth. That's real. That's right. But the way it is used now, that's the new word to say, man, that's the truth. Facts. That's pure fact. That's facts. Okay? Those words are part of our knowledge. Listen to me. If you're raising kids, which I'm raising one, and those words, parents, listen, tip you off to how your children are being cultivated. I don't know if I got anybody like myself who's got kids who are still growing up, but let me give you a little insight, moms and dads. And if you're a grandparent or somebody raising your grandkids or raising your nieces and nephews, listen, the terms that your children, grandchildren, nieces, nephews, foster kids, whatever, the terms they use give you some indication of how they're being cultivated. If you want to know how your children are being cultivated, pay attention to the lingo, to the knowledge, to the community knowledge that comes out of their mouth. Watch this, and I'm going to move on quick. If you want to know if your children are paying attention to you, if you want to know if your children are following your example, if you want to know if your children are being influenced more heavily by you and the cultivation that you have in place in this vehicle of your community or by some other influence, listen to their words. I'm not talking about ma'am and sir. I'm not talking about because you make them say yes, ma'am, and yes, sir, because you make them. No. Remember, culture is shared experiences, and it grows because the key word, the root word to culture is cult. It's cult. So all you got to do is just sit back, close your mouth, and listen to what your children are saying, and they don't even know that you're listening, and you will begin to understand the influences. All you got to do is track where those words are most heavily trafficked, and you will begin to find out where your children are most heavily trafficked. You will find out if your children are actually learning and influenced by your community or by another community and living in your house. I said something right there. I don't even know. If you want to find out without having to question them because they may or may not tell you the truth, all you got to do is listen to the music. All you got to do is look at the videos. All you've got to do is pay attention to the language, to the, here's another cultural word, another cultural element, the clothing. Do you got young girls who are insisting on trying to wear revealing clothing? But you, as a mother, don't dress like that. Guess what? She's dealing with a community of individuals who are violating her sexual disposition. And I don't give a rip what you think about it. If she is insisting on trying to present herself, and I don't care what her age is, if she could be 32 and got 3 kids, and she comes to the house when she get off work, and you barely can deal with what's in front of you because it's all hanging out all over the place. And even though, but she's a good mother, Gabe, I don't agree with you. I'm telling you right now, I'm telling you that if she is dressing in a manner that is constantly revealing, she is letting you know that the only way she's doing that is if she's, all of us talking about, I wear what I want to wear. No, you are in a community of people who are readily accepting of you presenting yourself that way. And whether you like it or not, give it enough time, culture grows, which means you end up losing friends that don't want to see it, and you gain friends that want to see it. So let me say it again. I know you don't like it, but you need to hear it. If your daughter is insisting on wearing clothing that is constantly so tight she can barely breathe, and that is revealing her curvages and revealing her cleavage and all of that, I promise you, she is dealing with a community of people. She is dealing with a community of people who are fascinated and fine with, and when I say fine, don't mean that that's healthy. Fine just means that they are keeping a mum so that they can keep seeing it. You understand what I'm saying? And if there are a lot of males, you don't like it, but I'm telling you why nurture is so important. Because if there are a lot of males in her community, I'm telling you right now, I don't care if she's 32, if she's 22, if she's 12, or if she's 52. If she is presenting herself constantly, I don't care if she's got a PhD, if she is constantly presenting herself, presenting her physicality, trust me, she is dealing with a community of people, and it's likely there is a lot of men in that community. I'm telling you right now, there are a lot of men in that community. If she says things like, most of my best friends are men, and then you look at her attire and you think that's hard to figure out, that ain't hard to figure out. I'm not saying that every female that has a lot of male friends dresses that way. But what I'm saying is, don't be surprised that if you know females that you may be in a community with, though you don't particularly care for their dress, I promise you, you may not be a reflection of their community, but that dress is reflecting a community. If you have young men around you who insist on sagging, no matter what you tell them about the history and all of that, I've heard the history of sagging and all of that. And while it bothers me, I don't sag. So of course it bothers me. Because I was cultivated, I was nurtured, I was raised pulling my pants up. I was raised to see the value. See, now I can say words like value now. Because the job I have, I'm not sagging, ladies and gentlemen. I ain't going to tell you what they pay me, but they're paying me all right. They're paying me all right. And trust me, my pants sagging would not be something that would be, let me use that word I just saw, normalized. My clients, maybe, but the males that work for that, and there's a few of us who work for this company, none of us sag. None of us do. I'm not saying just because we're all educated. No, because I've seen educated men with their butt cracks showing. Because they're trying to perpetuate a community that they, do you understand what I'm saying? I can tell how a person is being nurtured or how they're being cultivated. I can almost tell what kind of community they're in just by clothing and music. And the combination, you put some of those things together, and all of a sudden it starts shaping and forming and presenting to you how this person was nurtured. So when I see little boys and little girls, when I worked in the school systems in Texas and here in Louisiana, when I saw little girls and little boys and the manner in which they were carrying themselves, that looked very, very reminiscent of grown people, I knew not only were they being, are they in a community of a lot of adults, and those adults are highly influential, but if those kids are cussing, if those kids are talking loud and talking aggressively, they have somebody in their community, in the vehicle that is nurturing them that acts, what did I tell you 10 minutes ago? Because this stuff don't come out of nowhere. There are very few true movers and shakers. There are very few who are really cultural craftsmen. You know where Michael Jordan got wearing suits from? White businessmen. He didn't come up with that. He didn't create that. And by the way, the whole earring thing, if you look back in the do your African studies, we've been wearing earrings and those neck things for thousands of years. That stuff ain't new. Boy in an earring. Where you been? If you look at African tribes, jewelry all in the king's ear was a matter of prestige. I know your religion said boys shouldn't wear earrings. You just in the dark ages. You don't realize that kings, African kings, wore earrings. African kings wore nose rings. African kings wore those hoops on the neck, and the more hoops you had was a reflection of your high class and high standing. And Michael Jordan figured it out. He just decided to make it diamond studded. Oh, and by the way, physical engravings, tattoos, that stuff ain't new. That stuff goes back thousands of years. Even in the Bible, it talks about engraving or tattooing yourself. See, come on. Culture. So I could look at clothing. I could look at music. Now, again, individually speaking, don't misinterpret me. Individually speaking, those things are just what they are. There's obviously white people who listen to jazz and black people who listen to classical. So I'm not suggesting that all black people listen to jazz and all white people listen to classical, because there's also country music. And I know black people who love country music. I've listened to a little bit myself. I'm more eclectic. See, now you get a word like eclectic. See? Art. I love all kinds of art. I've written poetry, music. I've written contemporary Christian songs. I've written more, quote, gospel, black gospel songs. I've written non-Christian, non-religious songs from my cultural experiences. Now, my parents, especially particularly my father, my mother leans more towards the African in the American, in the African American, but my father loves Bette Midler and Celine Dion. My father called for the use of the English language, as you can see, to be more proper in our pronunciations. Oh, we have some of the slangs that I'm not going to say now. I know what the slangs are. I use them and the euphemisms, but even that word, euphemisms. And not just because I have a bachelor's degree in psychology. I knew that word before I got the degree. So euphemisms. My cultural background has a little bit of hood and a little bit of education. But in there, when we're talking about nature nurture, not just knowledge, we also have belief. Yeah, we got to cover it before I get off here. So we have knowledge. We have the general knowledge that is in that community, in that vehicle, that is nurturing our children, that we got nurtured by. But we also have belief. Not just simply belief in God or not in God, but also philosophical beliefs. Symbols, things like flags. I'm not going to turn back towards where I started, but obviously the Confederate flag. I think just saying it is enough. The Confederate flag is a flag that does not represent anything to have to do with me other than slavery. Point. Historically speaking, the Confederate flag was the flag of the South, and that flag represents the oppression of my people. Period. I don't care how proud the people who and I obviously see those flags I live in the South. So I see those flags. I see them on monster trucks. I see them hanging off people's houses. So when we say religion, what we really mean is belief system. Because within a community, within the vehicle of the community, there is a shared belief system. And again, I'm not just talking about God. For example, there are some who believe an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. They believe that. They believe in vengeance. They believe that blood is thicker than water, and that if somebody hurts your family, you hurt them. And I ain't just talking about something you seen on a movie. No. There are people who absolutely believe that if you stab my cousin, I gotta stab you. If you shoot my brother, I gotta kill your sister. If you talk bad to my mama, I gotta knock you out. That's a philosophy, that's an ideology that their community, and as a matter of fact, if you don't protect, if you don't shield, if you don't get revenge, then you got it coming to you. And that is an ingrained belief system. That is a part, watch this, of the culture, of the cultivation, of the nurturing. So watch this, real quick. If you want to stop crime in high crime neighborhoods, guess what you're going to have to do? You're going to have to address the philosophies that was passed down from generation to generation, because those philosophies are part of the culture. There are those who don't even catch their mouth if they hear you cussing and they walk in and see one of their relatives and hear you cussing. They don't even ask you a question. They walk right up to you and cuss you out, and then afterwards, okay, what happened? Because culturally, that's what they were taught. That's what they were taught. That's what you do. That's what you do. You get them told first, then you find out later. Tell me I'm wrong. Tell me I'm wrong. People are sitting in jail right today. That's what they used to say back. See, that's one of them phrases. Right today. Are sitting in jail right today because they blindly, dare I say, foolishly, defended a family member and didn't know the facts. The facts. And after they got through cussing somebody out, punching on somebody, or worse, come to find out that their family member was the one who was guilty. Right today, there are people sitting in prison and will spend the furtherance of their life in jail because of a religious disposition or philosophy that says you defend family because blood is thicker than water. I'm going to tell you right now, and I know I'm going to upset some people, but you know me. I ain't put my foot in my mouth almost at all tonight, so let me do it. I do not ascribe to blood is thicker than water. I just don't. One, biologically speaking, since the body is about 60 to 70% water, and without water, your blood thins out, that phrase on its face biologically is stupid. Because the very viscosity of blood is based on water. So the phrase is stupid. It's just stupid. It ain't even scientifically sound. But because so many people ascribe to blood is thicker than water as a justification, usually for foolishness. Nobody is using that phrase even culturally, and yes, they're using it foolishly. Blood is thicker than water, therefore I'm going to keep giving this person who's my blood relative money. Blood is thicker than water, therefore I'm going to defend them. I don't care what they do, even though they're the ones who are guilty. Blood is thicker than water, I'm going to let them drive my car, even though they've got 22 citations. Come on. Ain't nobody saying blood is thicker than water, usually in a situation where blood is thicker than water and they're graduating with a PhD. I do not subscribe to the philosophy because that's what it is. It's a philosophy. It's not scientifically true. And as a philosophy, it's absolutely stupid because you will lose your life behind your family. And while you're on your deathbed, you'll find out that your family was the one who sold you down the river. Tell me I'm wrong, because I'll tell you about Cain and Abel. Tell me I'm wrong, and I'll tell you about the Civil War, brother against brother. Tell me I'm wrong, and I'll tell you about the streets in Chicago. Tell me I'm wrong, and I'll tell you about white on white, black on black, blue on blue crime. Tell me I'm wrong. So I don't want to hear that madness. And by the way, for those of you who don't like me, are you a blood relative of your husband or your wife? Do you even understand what you're talking about? Blood is thicker than water. You're not the blood relative of your wife or your husband. So if you espouse blood is thicker than water, I will never marry you. Because that you're telling me you're going to put them ahead of me. And if we get married, I'm ahead of them, period. And I'm not your blood because that's nasty. That's called incest. We got all these divorces going on because culturally we are. See, y'all don't want to have this talk because culturally we have religion or philosophy or ideology that is destructive. It's destructive. And blood is thicker than water is why your husband is listening to his mama instead of listening to you. It's why your wife is listening to her daddy instead of listening to you. It's why your house is divided. Because the in-laws have got their mouth chirping, and blood is thicker than water, and you sitting there looking like a big lump on the wall, on a log. And you don't know who to side with. You chose to marry her, man. You chose to marry her. Marry him, woman. What do you mean who to side with? You side with your choice. I ain't going to preach, but I feel it. So understand when we're talking about culture, and I've walked through these things. Let me do this quickly. Lifestyle. I ain't going to get on it. But lifestyle speaks to the way things are done from day to day. Lifestyle. Lifestyle, and I know lifestyles are the rich and famous, but yeah, I'm not talking about that. When we talk about lifestyle, we're talking about the manner in which people live in that community. How you live it. When we say lifestyle, we're asking the question, how you live it. And if you want to, I'm going to do it again. I'm sorry if your kids are watching. I'm sorry, but I'm all in their business. If you want to get an inkling on what kind of lifestyle influences your children have, again, look at how they carry themselves from day to day. Point number one, are they clean? Are they clean? Don't give me that cleanliness is next to godliness nonsense. No. Do your children like things to be clean? If your children are comfortable with things being dirty, where are they getting that from? Unless, of course, you have a dirty lifestyle. And I don't mean dirty like you going out doing dirty things. No, but if you keep a dirty house and you are raising your children and look, don't get mad at me, and you're raising your children in a dirty house, well, don't be mad when you go to their house and you can't get in there. Don't be mad because they were raised And you gave them, you cultivated, you grew in them a dirty lifestyle. How do they handle their cars? How do they treat their clothes? How do they talk to each other? That's all a part of lifestyle. Are they used to cussing each other out? Are they used to defaming each other? Are they used to pulling each other down? Are they used to fighting each other without repentance, without sorrow, without apology? That's all lifestyle. Boy, this whole nurture thing is huge. This nurture thing is huge because that stuff gets passed down from generation to generation to generation. Thank God my parents are clean people. Clean people, not just my mama, my dad. He let somebody use his tools and they come back dirty and he'd be hot because he kept his tools clean. And he told me, I don't like when I loan my tools out to be his family members usually, and my tools come back dirty. Now, when we got old enough to use his tools, trust me, he let us know. And you better put them back where you got them from. Now, he ain't the most organized person. My mother is the organizer. I got that from her, thank God. But the reality of it is I do my best to keep a clean house, not just because I like clean, but I'm raising my son in this lifestyle. I'm not talking about wearing, yeah, I know that's a name brand, but I'm not talking about wearing name brand, which is a part of lifestyle. I get it. But I'm talking about just the manner in which you live. That's what lifestyle is, the style of your living. Get it? Lifestyle. It ain't just putting on Nikes. No. It ain't just wearing Gucci and carrying cord purses or whatever. Well, I don't know. It is how you carry yourself. Watch this, and I'm done. It is how you treat each other. The style in which you live your life. Do you live your life tripping? Yeah, I said it. That's one of them words that came from my culture, my cultivating. Do you live your life behaving like you don't got no kind of sense? That's another phrase that came from, what's that? Close that door. You weren't born in a barn. That phrase was establishing a philosophy about conserving electricity. Guess what? I'm a conservator of electricity because of phrases like that. I kid you not. I am conservative when it comes to electricity and water. I'm conservative. Oh, I have my areas in which I splurge, but it's very few. I'm very conservative. Let me give you another word that speaks to lifestyle. Budgeting. Are you a spender? Are you a big spender? That's lifestyle. Did you raise your children watching you just splurge and spend and splurge and spend? And then you get mad because they constantly borrowing money from you, but won't touch their own money. Because they grew up, I'm just messing with everybody's stuff tonight. They grew up with a lifestyle of not only having nice things, but getting those nice things from somebody else. Wow. Which is why you have to be careful about spoiling your children. The better word there, if you use the scripture, is ruin. We've made the word spoil some kind of pseudo great word. No. If you spare the rod, you ruin. You spoil or ruin. That word is more like spoiled food or ruined food. That's not talking about splurging on your children. Sometimes you got to splurge. Sometimes you got to spoil yourself. No. That word, biblically speaking, let me give a quick Bible study. That word is talking about ruining. So if you don't properly, your lifestyle doesn't include discipline, you will ruin your child, and you are potentially I'm going to say it. You potentially ruined yourself. You don't have discipline. You don't have discipline. And so you didn't discipline because you didn't have discipline. And because you probably wasn't raised with discipline. Or you had such an overabundance of discipline growing up that it cultivated you. What grew in you, watch this, what grew in you was anger. What grew in you from the overabundance of discipline, what was considered to be discipline, really was abuse. That wasn't discipline. That was abuse. They might have been calling it discipline, but what there really was abuse. I need to do a whole topic on discipline versus abuse, so we can show you the difference between what is discipline and what is abuse. I think I'm gonna have to write that down. We need to do that topic. Now I'm done. So lifestyle, and again, this thing has 16. Go and read them. Economics, economy, on and on and on and on. Architecture, we talked about all that. Fashion, we kind of hit some of this stuff. Food, if you got issues with obesity, food in your cultivation, was it clean your plate? Unfortunately, I grew up with a clean your plate philosophy. So you think about philosophy, religion, clean your plate, clean your plate, clean your plate, clean your plate. Now I'm working to get this weight off. I try to not serve, over an abundance. Anyway, so there were 16 of those on that particular article. Go ahead and take a look at them, read them yourself. I just shared, 8, 9 of them, whatever it was, just to give you an understanding of culture and culture falling under the umbrella of the bigger category of nurture, nature versus nurture. And as I suggested, really, I think those things have been eroded. But if you go back to the original discussion, I don't think it's nature versus nurture. I think it's nature and nurture. We get some things from biology, passed down biologically speaking, and then we get some things, obviously quite a few things, from nurturing. And then within nurturing, if you will, the functioning of nurturing within a community is culture, is growth, is cultivation. And I want to encourage you to really look at that article, think on those things. I'll put it up as I get ready to close. Think of those things and correspond with me. Hit me up on Messenger if you're on Facebook. Type some comments in here, and I'll try to get in contact with you. Watch this video back. Share this out. Get this in front of as many. The last 3 or 4 weeks, get these videos in front of people. Encourage people to come follow me on YouTube in particular, where I've got well over 200 videos. I've been broadcasting for 3 years, now technically for 5 years, but I've gotten rid of the first couple of years of videos. So the last 3+ years of videos are on my YouTube page, over 200 videos, Bible studies, commentaries like this, conversations, Q&As, all kind of stuff. I need to do more Q&A stuff. But anyway, have a good night. See you next week.